In Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, one man stands out as pure chaos. A small, sharp-eyed gangster with a permanent smirk and a terrifying reputation for violence. In the film, he is called Tommy DeVito, a hot-headed killer who laughs while pulling the trigger, a man who seems almost cartoonishly dangerous. But the real man behind that character was far more unsettling. His name was Tommy DeSimone, and unlike the version immortalized in Hollywood, the real story of Tommy DeSimone did not end with a dramatic execution scene inside a quiet suburban house. It ended with something much stranger, a disappearance so brutal and so mysterious that even decades later, no body has ever been found. Because the truth about Tommy DeSimone was darker than the film ever showed. And to understand what happened to him, it's necessary to go back long before the Lufthansa heist, before the headlines, before the rumors of revenge. Back to the streets where he first learned that violence was currency. Tommy DeSimone was born in 1950 into a family already deeply connected to organized crime. His brothers were criminals. His cousins were criminals. His world was saturated with the culture of the New York mafia long before he was old enough to understand what that meant. The DeSimone family operated around the neighborhoods controlled by the Lucchese crime family, one of the 5 families that dominated organized crime in New York. In that world, loyalty was everything. Fear was even more valuable. And Tommy DeSimone showed very early that he could produce both. By the time he was a teenager, he was already running errands for local gangsters. Small tasks at first, delivering messages, acting as a lookout, hanging around bars and social clubs where men with reputations sat in dark corners, discussing business that never appeared in public records. For many young men in that environment, crime was simply the only path they ever saw. But Tommy was different. Most criminals learned to control their violence. Tommy seemed to enjoy it. According to multiple documented accounts, people who knew him described a personality that could switch instantly. One moment he was joking, laughing, telling stories. The next moment he could become explosively angry. It was not calculated intimidation. It was something far less predictable. By the early 1970s, Tommy DeSimone had fallen in with a group of criminals operating under Paul Vario, a powerful captain within the Lucchese crime family. Vario controlled a large network of associates who carried out everything from truck hijackings to loan sharking and extortion. Among those associates were 2 men who would later become infamous in American crime history: Henry Hill and James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke. Together, they formed a crew that specialized in high-profit hijackings. Cargo trucks carrying cigarettes, electronics, and expensive merchandise were routinely targeted. The stolen goods were quickly sold through underground networks that stretched across New York. For the crew, it was an extremely profitable operation. But the work required a certain type of person. Someone willing to use violence without hesitation. Someone who could intimidate drivers, enforce discipline, and ensure that no one spoke to police. Tommy DeSimone quickly became that person. Henry Hill later described Tommy as one of the most dangerous men he had ever known. Not because he was the biggest. Tommy was actually short, but because he had absolutely no hesitation when it came to killing. In the mafia world, murder was supposed to follow rules. Executions were approved by higher-ranking members. Violence was controlled. Targets were carefully chosen. Tommy DeSimone did not always follow those rules. And that made even hardened gangsters nervous. Because unpredictability is dangerous inside an organization built on hierarchy. One incident became particularly infamous. In 1973, a young man named Billy Batts, a made member of the Gambino crime family, crossed paths with Tommy inside a bar. Batts had recently been released from prison. He was an experienced mafia soldier, someone who had already earned his status as a made man, which meant something very important in mafia tradition. Made men were untouchable. Associates like Tommy DeSimone were never supposed to harm them. But according to multiple accounts, Batts had a habit of teasing Tommy about his past. Specifically, he mocked Tommy for shining shoes as a teenager. To outsiders, the insult might seem trivial. Inside that world, it was humiliating. And Tommy did not forget humiliation. Weeks later, Batts walked into a bar where Tommy, Henry Hill, and Jimmy Burke were drinking. The atmosphere at first appeared friendly. Drinks were poured. Conversation flowed easily. But something else was happening. Something Batts did not realize. Tommy had already decided what was going to happen that night. According to investigators and later testimony, Batts was suddenly attacked inside the bar. Tommy DeSimone and Jimmy Burke began beating him brutally. Witnesses later described the scene as savage. Batts was struck repeatedly, kicked, dragged to the floor. The assault did not stop even after he could no longer defend himself. Eventually, the battered Gambino soldier was loaded into the trunk of a car. Still alive. What happened next would become one of the most infamous murders connected to the crew. As the car drove through the night, sounds came from the trunk. Batts was still breathing, still moving, and according to later accounts, Tommy opened the trunk. What followed was another violent attack. Batts was stabbed repeatedly. The beating continued until there was no movement at all. His body was eventually buried, but the killing had violated one of the most sacred rules of organized crime. Tommy DeSimone had murdered a maid member of another family, without permission, and although the body was hidden, the rumor began spreading almost immediately. The film Goodfellas portrays this moment with shocking brutality, but even that scene only captures a portion of the reality, because the killing of Billy Batts did something dangerous. It placed Tommy DeSimone on a path that could only end one way. Inside the mafia, revenge is not optional. When a made man is killed without authorization, the response is inevitable. The man responsible must die. The only question is when and how. But for a time, Tommy DeSimone seemed untouchable. The crew continued operating. Hijackings continued. Money continued flowing. And Tommy's reputation only grew more terrifying. According to associates, he began committing violence with even greater frequency. Some victims were criminals. Others were simply people who had crossed him in the wrong moment. And each act added to a growing list of enemies. Some inside the underworld, some outside it. Then came December 1978, a crime that would become one of the most legendary heists in American history. The Lufthansa heist at John F. Kennedy International Airport. More than $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewelry were stolen from the airline's cargo facility. At the time, it was the largest cash robbery ever committed on American soil. Jimmy Burke was widely believed to be the mastermind behind the operation. And although Tommy DeSimone was not the planner, he was deeply connected to the crew responsible. But massive heists create massive problems, because every person involved becomes a potential witness. And Jimmy Burke had a reputation for solving that problem in a very specific way. People began disappearing, one by one. Drivers, participants, associates who knew too much. Bodies started appearing across New York. Some strangled, some shot, some simply vanished. Law enforcement quickly realized something enormous had happened. Investigators began closing in, and within the criminal world, paranoia began spreading. Everyone was watching everyone else. No one trusted anyone. But amid the chaos, one man believed he was about to receive the ultimate reward. Tommy DeSimone had been told that his induction ceremony was coming. He was finally going to be made a full member of the mafia. It was the highest honor an associate could receive. Protection, status, power. But the film never showed the truth about that night. Because when Tommy DeSimone left his home to attend the ceremony, he had no idea that the men waiting for him were not there to welcome him. They were there to settle a debt that had been waiting for years. They were there to settle a debt that had been waiting for years. For Tommy DeSimone, the promise of being made was the culmination of everything he had spent his life working toward. In the mafia hierarchy, becoming a made member meant protection that ordinary associates did not have. It meant prestige, authority, and most importantly, it meant that harming him without approval would be a death sentence for anyone who tried. For a man with Tommy's reputation, that protection was desperately needed, because by 1978, Tommy DeSimone had accumulated enemies across multiple crime families. And some of those enemies had not forgotten what happened to Billy Batts. Inside the mafia, rules are not suggestions. They are laws enforced by blood. And the murder of a made Gambino soldier was not something that could simply be overlooked. But for years, nothing had happened. No retaliation, no open threats, which made it seem as though the problem had somehow been resolved. According to multiple documented accounts, this illusion was carefully maintained for one reason. They were waiting for the right moment. On the night Tommy believed he was being inducted into mafia, he was reportedly told to dress well. A ceremony was taking place. His presence was required. The details of mafia initiation rituals are notoriously secretive, but the general outline is known. The candidate is brought into a private room. A group of made men surround him. His fingers pricked. Blood falls onto a saint's image that is then burned in his hands while he swears loyalty to the organization. For many gangsters, it was a sacred moment. For Tommy DeSimone, it was something else entirely. A trap. According to Henry Hill's later testimony, Tommy left expecting celebration. He believed that the years of violence, loyalty, and criminal work had finally earned him entry into the inner circle. Hill later described the moment with quiet dread. Tommy was excited, proud, almost nervous, because despite his brutality, becoming made meant validation. It meant recognition. But the truth was far darker. Because while Tommy believed he was driving toward a ceremony, other men were preparing for something else. They were preparing an execution. The plan had been building quietly. After the murder of Billy Batts, the Gambino family had demanded justice. Batts had been a made soldier under John Gotti's mentor, Carmine Fatico, and his disappearance had not gone unnoticed. Rumors spread quickly through mafia circles. People talked. People guessed. Eventually, the truth reached the Gambino leadership. Tommy DeSimone had killed a made man, and that meant he had to die. But the situation was complicated. Tommy was closely associated with Jimmy Burke, a powerful and profitable earner connected to the Lucchese family through Paul Vario. Killing him immediately could create conflict between families. So the decision was postponed. Not canceled. Postponed. The mafia has patience. Sometimes years of patience. And while Tommy continued his violent life, the order for his death remained quietly waiting. The Lufthansa heist may have accelerated everything. The robbery itself had been astonishingly successful. Over $5 million in cash had been stolen from the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport. But enormous crimes attract enormous attention. Federal investigators began examining every possible connection. Informants were questioned. Surveillance increased. Within the criminal world, fear began spreading rapidly. Jimmy Burke understood something very clearly. Anyone connected to the heist could potentially become a witness. So he began eliminating people who might talk. Participants started disappearing. One was found in a garbage truck compactor. Another was discovered shot inside a car. Others were simply never seen again. Law enforcement later linked these killings to Burke's efforts to silence potential informants. The aftermath of the heist became almost as infamous as the robbery itself. Bodies appeared across New York. The underworld was turning on itself. Tommy DeSimone was moving through this environment of paranoia and violence when the call finally came. The message was simple. He was ready to be made. For a man like Tommy, it was the ultimate validation. But the timing was strange. The ceremony was happening outside the usual social clubs, not in the familiar Lucchese locations where most business took place. Still, Tommy did not question it. Ambition often silences suspicion, and Tommy had always believed his reputation for violence would eventually earn him status. So he went. What happened next has never been officially documented in a police report, because there were no surviving witnesses willing to testify. But according to multiple accounts from law enforcement and former mob associates, the sequence of events is widely believed to have followed a familiar mafia pattern. Tommy arrived expecting a ceremony. Instead, he walked into a room filled with men who had been waiting years for this moment. There was no speech, no explanation, just violence. Henry Hill later claimed that Tommy was shot almost immediately after entering the room. Some accounts suggest he was struck in the face with a shotgun blast. Others claim he was shot repeatedly before he had time to react. The exact details remain uncertain, but the outcome was not. Tommy DeSimone died instantly. The man who had spent years terrifying others had been eliminated without warning. No ceremony, no promotion, only execution. Afterward, his body disappeared. In the mafia world, bodies are often hidden in ways designed to prevent discovery. Buried in secret locations, placed in industrial sites, sometimes even destroyed entirely. Investigators searched for years. No remains were ever found. Tommy DeSimone simply vanished. And officially, that is exactly how the case remains classified. Missing. Henry Hill later recalled the moment he realized something had gone wrong. Days passed, then weeks. Tommy never returned. At first, Hill believed something had delayed the ceremony. But the silence stretched on. Eventually, the truth became unavoidable. Tommy had not been made. He had been killed. And the reason was something the film never fully explored: the murder of Billy Batts, a debt that had been waiting quietly for 5 years. But the killing of Tommy DeSimone did not end the violence surrounding the Lufthansa heist. In fact, it was only the beginning of a larger collapse. Because the bodies connected to that robbery kept appearing, investigators began assembling a disturbing pattern. Nearly everyone who had participated in the heist was dying, and many of those deaths pointed back to one man, Jimmy Burke. The mastermind behind the robbery was now eliminating his own crew, and law enforcement was starting to close in. Witnesses were being pressured, informants were emerging, and a massive crime that had once looked like the perfect robbery was slowly becoming a trail of evidence. The Lufthansa heist had made history, but it had also triggered a chain reaction that would eventually tear the entire crew apart. And within a few years, one of the men who knew the full story would decide to do something the mafia feared more than anything. He would talk. He would talk. Inside the mafia, silence is the most sacred rule. Omerta. It is not simply a code of conduct. It is the foundation that allows the entire criminal structure to survive. As long as no one speaks to investigators, crimes remain rumors. Bodies remain mysteries. Entire networks of violence continue operating in the shadows. But when one man talks, the entire system begins to crack. And in the aftermath of the Lufthansa heist, that crack began with Henry Hill. By the late 1970s, the world around Hill was collapsing. The Lufthansa robbery had brought enormous attention from federal investigators. Surveillance increased. Informants were being questioned. Phone records, financial movements, and witness statements were slowly being assembled into a clearer picture of the criminal network operating around the Lucchese family. At the same time, the internal violence within Jimmy Burke's crew had become impossible to ignore. Bodies connected to the robbery continued appearing across New York. Martin Krugman, the man who had originally provided information about the Lufthansa cash shipment, disappeared. Louis Caffra, another participant, was later found dead. Several others vanished without a trace. Each death carried the same quiet implication. Someone was cleaning up loose ends, and many investigators believed that someone was Jimmy Burke. Hill understood what this meant. He had known Burke for years. He had seen the man operate. Burke was not reckless, but he was ruthless when he believed his survival depended on it. Anyone connected to the robbery could become a potential witness, which meant anyone connected to the robbery could become a target. And Henry Hill was deeply connected. He had helped plan aspects of the operation. He knew the participants. He knew the flow of money and stolen goods. More importantly, he knew about murders. Not just the killings connected to the Lufthansa heist, but others as well, including the murder that had sealed Tommy DeSimone's fate years earlier, the killing of Billy Batts. For years, Hill had remained silent, but silence becomes harder to maintain when the people around you begin disappearing. Investigators later discovered that Hill had also developed serious drug problems during this period. Cocaine trafficking had become another major part of his life, despite strict mafia rules against dealing narcotics. Eventually, that decision would lead to his arrest. In 1980, Henry Hill was taken into federal custody on drug trafficking charges. The arrest changed everything, because inside the mafia world, a man facing serious prison time becomes a liability, especially if that man knows as much as Henry Hill did. Hill later described the moment he realized what was happening. While he sat in jail awaiting trial, news reached him that Jimmy Burke had been discussing the possibility of eliminating him. Whether the threat was real or exaggerated remains uncertain. But inside the criminal underworld, perception can be just as powerful as reality. Hill believed his life was in danger, and once that belief took hold, the decision became almost inevitable. He would cooperate. In 1980, Henry Hill entered the Federal Witness Protection Program and began providing testimony to investigators. The silence had been broken. What followed was one of the most detailed insider accounts of mafia operations ever given to law enforcement. Hill described the structure of the Lucchese crime family. He explained the mechanics of truck hijackings, illegal gambling operations, and loan sharking. He detailed the planning behind the Lufthansa heist, and he described the violent culture that surrounded the crew. But perhaps most importantly, Hill spoke about Tommy DeSimone. For years, Tommy had existed mostly as a rumor in police files, a violent associate linked to multiple unsolved crimes. But Hill's testimony added a clearer picture. According to Hill, Tommy had committed numerous murders during his time with Crew. Some were ordered. Others were spontaneous acts of violence driven by anger or ego. The murder of Billy Batts became one of the most significant revelations. Hill confirmed that Batts had been beaten and killed by Tommy DeSimone and Jimmy Burke. He described the burial. He described the panic that followed when Batts was reported missing. And he explained why the killing had placed Tommy in such a dangerous position within the mafia hierarchy. Because Batts had been a made member of the Gambino family. Killing him without permission was not just murder. It was a direct violation of mafia law. Investigators also learned more about Tommy's disappearance. Although Hill did not witness the execution personally, he confirmed what many within the underworld already suspected. Tommy had been lured to what he believed was his induction ceremony. Instead of becoming a made member, he was executed as retaliation for Batts' murder. The order likely came from the Gambino family, and the Lucchese leadership had allowed it to happen. Because protecting Tommy DeSimone was not worth starting a war between families. In organized crime, even the most violent men are expendable when larger interests are involved. Despite Hill's testimony, Tommy DeSimone's body was never recovered. Searches were conducted. Investigators examined potential burial sites. Informants provided theories about where the body might have been disposed. Some believed he had been buried in a hidden grave in New York. Others claimed his body had been destroyed entirely. But no physical evidence ever surfaced. Tommy DeSimone remained officially listed as missing, a ghost inside the historical record of organized crime. Meanwhile, the men who had once dominated the hijacking operations around JFK Airport were facing their own downfall. Paul Vario, the Lucchese captain who had overseen much of the crew's activity, was eventually convicted on racketeering charges. He died in federal prison in 1988. Jimmy Burke was later convicted in connection with the murder of Richard Eaton, another associate. Although investigators strongly suspected Burke's involvement in multiple Lufthansa-related killings, including those of several participants, he was never formally charged for the heist itself. He died in prison in 1996. The empire they had built through violence, intimidation, and organized theft slowly collapsed under federal investigations and internal betrayals. Years later, the story of this crew would reach a global audience. Nicholas Pileggi's book Wise Guy chronicled Henry Hill's life inside the mafia. The book would later become the basis for Martin Scorsese's 1990 film Goodfellas. In the film, Tommy DeSimone appears under a fictional name, Tommy DeVito. Joe Pesci's performance earned an Academy Award and became one of the most famous portrayals of a gangster ever captured on screen. But the film simplified certain truths. Hollywood often does. The real Tommy DeSimone was not simply a volatile character designed for dramatic tension. He was a real man whose life was defined by escalating violence. A man who committed murders that triggered consequences far beyond what he anticipated. And when the mafia finally decided his debt had to be paid, there was no trial, no warning, no chance for escape. The final irony is almost poetic. Tommy DeSimone spent years believing that fear made him powerful. He believed his brutality earned him respect. He believed that one day he would stand among the made men of the mafia as one of them. But the truth was something far colder. Inside the world he served, loyalty only extends as far as usefulness. And when the time came, the organization he hoped to join simply erased him. No ceremony, no honor, just another disappearance in a city already filled with them. Because the legend shown on screen was only a shadow of the real story. And the real story ended in silence.